Hi guys, it's Danny from ScrapFX Design Team for June 2021. Today I'm using the new release large tags. These are 5 tags in different sizes and with a little scalloping on the edge here. So I'm using the Distress stains here. This is a tea dye stain and I'm just staining both sides, front and back, on all the edges of the tag. This is just in preparation of what I want to put down on the tags. So just drying off that dye stain there. And I've just got a little bit of scrap box with the corrugation in it. I'm just peeling back the surface paper to get the corrugation. And I'm just going to glue that down randomly in little pieces over the 5 tags. So I'm just using a matte medium here to glue that down. And this is just going to add a little bit of interest and a bit of texture to my tags. I'm now using a grunge paste here, and I'm just again using a palette knife, and I'm going to scrape that all over the cards as well, just fairly randomly, not really thinking about where I'm adding it. I'm really just going for a really grungy look on these tags. So this one here is a pumice texture paste. It's got a little bit of grit in it. It just has a different feel to the grunge paste. And then I've got a third texture paste here, and this one's got little glass beads in it. So really just getting a lot of texture on the back of these cards and drying that off with my heat tool. Once that's nice and dry, I'm going to give it a coat of gesso, and while that gesso is wet, I'm now sprinkling embossing powders just randomly all over. I've gone with some darker colours here, and I've also got some distress glazes as well. So the glazes are a little bit translucent, and of course the embossing powders are opaque. So I'm really looking for this sort of metally look. Using a little bit more gesso here, and that's just helping to make the embossing powder stick while it's still wet. And I'm just adding a little bit more of that embossing powder around the edges of the card. This is a fun but quite a messy technique. Just using the heat tool to activate that embossing powder, and again going through and just doing the same process with each card, and really just sprinkling that embossing powder out. I'm not really trying to get them to look the same. I want each card to be quite different. And so I'm just pouring that embossing powder out and adding more embossing powder where I need it. So this is the end effect, and I'm just using a bit of book paper here just to do the back ends of the cards so that they're kind of finished off. So I'm just gluing that down, and I've done the other 4 cards, or the other 4 tags. So here I'm using a ScrapFX stamp set. This one's called Inside Numbers, and I'm just stamping that down on some white cardstock, and this is also a ScrapFX ruler stamp. I'm going to use these little stamps as embellishments for my tags. I've just got some magic dimensional here, and I'm just going to layer a glaze of that dimensional product over the top, which will harden off. And just trimming off the book paper here on the back side of my tag. So quite happy with those backgrounds and how they've turned out. So obviously these have dried overnight, and now I'm just trimming them off. This is the new collage paper that's been released called Bohemian Beauties, and they're quite vintage looking, so they just really screamed for a right place to put on these tags. I just thought these were beautiful. So I'm just trimming them up now, getting them ready to put onto my tags. They look stunning. Now I'm just using a little distress tool here, and I'm just grunging up the sides of the pictures of these little beauties, and just trying to make them look like swap cards or old photos basically. So just giving those edges a really good distress about on all the edges there, and on the smaller photos as well. So I'm just using some tea dye distress ink just to edge around the photos again just to give them a little bit more of a vintage feel. And I'm just doing all the photos that I've cut out. So now I'm just using a little design paper. I've got a little bit of fodder that's happening on my desk, and I'm basically just going to assemble pieces together. This is a little bit of gauze, medical gauze, and I'm going to use the tea dye stain to stain that gauze up because it's a little bit stark white at the moment. So I've just added a little bit of water to the tea dye stain and just sort of dragging that gauze in there. And now I'm going to layer it out and give it a quick dry. Just trimming a little bit of that gauze up, and I'm going to layer that down. So now I'm just auditioning the little bits and pieces that I've got, little bits of book paper and scrapbook paper, the gauze. Again, adding a little bit more distressing to the paper. A little bit of stains or splatter there, ink splatter. And of course I fiddle around a little bit here and just trying to audition in the pieces, see how I want to go. Adding the little stamped embellishments, and I was lucky enough to find some postage stamps. These are quite old stamps I found in an antique store recently. Adding a little bit of lace, and now I'm just going to glue it down because I could fiddle with this all night. I'm just trying to remember where I put everything and layer it all down, and gluing that down with my fine tip applicator. And now I'm just adding a few little embellishments. So again, this is the ScrapFX stamp set, inside numbers with that glaze over the top. And now moving on to the second tag, I'm just edging again around all the back side of the book paper and on the edges of the tag. Using a little bit more of that gauze and a little bit more scrapbooking paper, distressing the edges with the ink and the distressing tool. And then again, I'm just using a little bit of my fodder that I've got. These are festival hall tickets. Again, once I'm happy with that sort of assemblage, I'm going to try and glue that down pretty quickly. So just using that distress tool to distress the ribbons up, a little bit of lace. I'm just sort of crinkling things and inking it up, trying to give it that vintage feel, and that all these pieces are quite old, just so it all works together. course it's always smart to put the ink on around the edges before the glue. Just adding a little bit more gauze here, and then I've got a little flower embellishment that I've inked up as well, and I'm going to glue down here as well. Now I'm just using that little ruler that I stamped out earlier, inking around the sides, just getting rid of all that stark white paper. A bit more scrapbooking papers. And again, I'm just going to audition bits and pieces from my desk to try and make this tag work. And I really struggled with that ruler, so this is a ScrapFX silhouette, the Mandala in the white. So I'm just going to cut that in half and add that to the collection. I'm just going to use this ScrapFX lace stamp, just to stamp on some book paper as well, give it a little bit more interest in the background there. A little bit of lace on the back of the photo, and then I'm going to try and glue all this down as well without too much procrastinating. I like how that mandala is just poking out the edge. And by cutting it in half, I'm able to use the other half in another tag later. So again, just using a few little postage stamps, adding those stamped images from ScrapFX. And I'm just trying to get some consistency across the board with all of the tags. So by adding similar elements, it sort of gives it a theme that runs through all 5 tags. I've just added a little photo down the bottom there, which I think works really well. A little bit of scrap paper. This is just backing from a sticker paper. And again, just gluing down the last elements here. And again, inking the back of the tag as well, so that it all works cohesively and looks vintagey. So again, just laying out my pieces, trying to work out where I want those. Still trying to work out how to use that ruler, and I've just got it made here. So I finally get to use a bit of that ruler. This tag come together a little bit quicker than the rest. I think I was starting to find my flow here. So just adding the little crocheted parts of lace and the little stamped elements. And then these beautiful collage papers from ScrapFX. This is the rest of the mandala that I used in the previous tag. And then just hiding that cut edge with the ruler, so that works really well. Just moving that flower into another position so I can use that smaller photo. And this was the last tag which I did in video. So here I'm just using some reclaimed sari ribbon, and I'm just going to thread that through the whole of the tag. It's a little bit of chiffon and a bit of lace, a bit of crocheted ribbon as well. And so I'm just using a variety of different colours here and textures to give it a nice little feel. So just threading that through. And I'm actually going to tie those off with little scrap pieces of ribbon instead of knotting them, just because I was a little bit worried about the whole splitting, because I was really forcing a lot of that sari ribbon in there and it was heavily beaded. So just using a little scrap piece of ribbon just to tie a knot around the base there, as you can see. And I think that works really well. Just cutting off the extra lengths. I think the added ribbons just give it a little bit more of a dimension, another taste of texture on these tags. So I was really happy with the way that these finished off. I'm just going to put them onto a ring hook here now. But these would be perfect projects to add to your junk journals or to your vintage books, or even just as gift tags. But I think they look really super cute on these ring holders as well. So I decided I needed little quotes on these cards just to finish them off. So this is the Kraft Words Journey, and I'm just adding some little quotes from that in the Kraft colour cardstock. Again, just using my distress ink to edge them up and give them that little vintage feel, and quickly just gluing those little quotes down. Again, just another little quick flick through of the finished product. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial and found it inspiring, and definitely I hope you get to try these Bohemian Beauties. They are just a gorgeous collage sheet. Don't forget to leave a comment, tell us what you think of my project, and I'd love it if you haven't already subscribed to my channel. Thanks for watching, guys.